on 2024 campaign trail. We're joined by political reporters Jasmine Wright and Paul Steinhauser to talk about the latest developments in the presidential, Senate, and House campaigns from the past week.
We're joined by a pair of national political reporters in studio. It's Jasmine Wright with NOTUS. Joining us via Zoom, it's Paul Steinhauser. And Paul Steinhauser, I want to start with your latest piece on the politics of disaster response. The headline, the Fox News headline, back-to-back hurricanes rock the Harris-Trump presidential campaigns. Explain how these natural disasters are all playing out on the campaign trail.
Good morning from Pittsburgh. And yeah, I guess it's no surprise, right? Hurricanes have been impacting political presidential campaigns for a long time. Think back to 1992 and then President George Herbert Walker Bush, his response, FEMA's response at that time to Hurricane Andrew, which slammed into Florida, did him no favors. We've seen it help presidents as well. Think 2012, Superstorm Sandy. Remember, it smacked into the eastern seaboard. Arguably helped then President Obama win re-election. Here we go again. We got the back-to-back hurricanes. Helene, which just tore through the southeast, doing some immense damage in states like Georgia and North Carolina, two crucial battleground states. And now Milton, which yesterday we saw go right through Florida. And there's still a huge mess down there. A couple of million still without power, and the death toll rising there as well. So, yeah, obviously, former President Trump, his campaign, you heard the clip you just played from Senator Vance, his running mate, just a few minutes ago, very critical of what President Biden and Vice President Harris, remember, it's the same administration, they see this as a political opportunity to criticize the competence of Kamala Harris.
Jasmine Wright, what are the campaigns saying about efforts to try to ensure voting access in hurricane-impacted areas, modifying early voting days,
Sure.
and changing polling locations if needed?
Yeah. Well, I think that both Republicans and Democrats at the local level are open to trying to make sure that they are retaining access to people's right to vote in these really hard-hitting areas. I know that in 2020, Republicans weren't really for modifications to early voting days when it came to issues like disasters, and now they're asking for it in states like North Carolina and Georgia that were hard hit and that are obviously going to be really consequential to President Trump's base. But I think just getting to Paul's point here, right? The former president has used these disasters to criticize Vice President Harris, but Vice President Harris has also used these disasters to criticize former President Trump, because him spreading all of that misinformation, saying that FEMA was giving disaster relief to migrants, which has been debunked several times, really falls into her campaign's playbook, which allows them to say, look, America, there are two choices in temperament. There's President Trump, and then there's Vice President Harris, and allowing her to really call him unserious and her to say that he is unempathetic, while we've seen her in the last 3 days try to show the most empathy to the American people. So it's working in Trump's favor in some ways, but it's also working in the vice president's.
Paul Steinhauser, you mentioned you're in Pittsburgh. That's where Barack Obama was appearing with Kamala Harris with the campaign. This is Barack Obama about a minute and a half from yesterday. I want to show it to viewers.
When Donald Trump lies or cheats or shows utter disregard for our Constitution, when he calls POWs losers or fellow citizens vermin, people make excuses for it. They think it's okay. They think, well, at least he's owning the libs. He's really sticking it to them. It's okay, as long as our side wins. And by the way, I'm sorry, gentlemen, I've noticed this especially with some men who seem to think Trump's behavior, the bullying and the putting people down, is a sign of strength. And I am here to tell you that is not what real strength is. It never has been. Real strength is about working hard and carrying a heavy load without complaining. Real strength is about taking responsibility for your actions and telling the truth even when it's inconvenient. Real strength is about helping people who need it and standing up for those who can't always stand up for themselves. That is what we should want for our daughters and for our sons, and that is what I want to see in a president of the United States of America.
Former President Barack Obama in Pittsburgh. Paul Steinhauser, what was your assessment of Barack Obama back on the campaign trail and how the campaign plans to deploy him here in the final weeks?
And this was the first event for the former president, who remains, if you look at polling, he remains extremely popular with Democrats. His favorable ratings are above water with independents as well. This is all about getting out the vote. This is the first of a number of stops he will be making over the next, we're down now under 4 weeks. So the time is clicking. He also was helping Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania, who's in a very tough re-election battle, one of the races that could determine whether the Republicans win back the Senate or not. What I thought was really important about that clip you just played there, of course, he was criticizing former President Trump. He did that throughout his speech. He was very creative and very vicious in some ways in really dissecting Trump. But the whole idea of the gender gap, and we're seeing a tremendous gender gap in this election. And you saw that message there tailored to men, to not be susceptible to the Donald Trump's portrayal of strength. And earlier at a campaign headquarters stop, before he did the rally, he tailored that message specifically to black male voters, because we've seen polling indicate that Donald Trump is doing quite well with black male voters and making some serious gains. This is something that the Harris campaign is concerned about, and I think that's one of the reasons for former President Obama really zeroed in on that message last night.
You mentioned the gender gap. This is an NBC poll from September of registered voters among men. Kamala Harris with 40% of the male vote, Donald Trump 52%. Among women, Kamala Harris 58% to Donald Trump's 37%. Jasmine Wright on that pitch by Barack Obama.
Yeah, I mean, look, battle of the genders for sure. I think it's just so funny because there is no better way to tell that Democrats are in the closer than when they bring out former President Barack Obama, right? He is the person that Democrats bring in to really close the argument, not just to make the stakes of the election so clear, which I think that we saw him do in that clip, but also to rally Democratic voters, to get them to the polls and get them to the polls early. That is why they are deploying the former president right now. Not just because Democrats love early voting, they've always had an advantage of it for the last few modern cycles, but also because of all of these hurricanes and kind of the depth of reporting that we're going to see in states like North Carolina, states like Georgia, crucial to both for the former president, but also Vice President Harris when she's trying to flip some of these, make them real purple states. There's just not going to be quality polling because people barely have the ability to charge their phones. They're certainly not going to use that charge to talk to pollsters. And so getting folks out early is going to give the campaigns that data that they need to know where they should surge those last minute resources. And so this is why former President Obama is so effective, because he makes the case, but also encourages people to mail those ballots in early, but also go to the polls early. We know that Pennsylvania is a state that provides Democrats with a lot of trouble when it comes to voting because people mail in their ballots, but they don't get counted until the last day. And so this is really them trying to figure out where those numbers look soft and where they should put their resources. And that is why the former president, in a lot of ways, is so successful, because he gets the case of Democrats and he gets them out earlier than most people.
Phone numbers as usual. Go ahead, Paul Steinhauser.
There's also another former president the campaign just announced who will also be out there doing the same thing. And that is former President Bill Clinton, who, like former President Obama, also spoke at the Democratic convention in Chicago back in August. He'll be heading I think over the weekend to Georgia, to rural parts of Georgia, and then on to North Carolina next week, where he'll be doing a bus tour. And that is the whole idea there as well, to get out the vote, get it out early. And this is something where Democrats, as Jasmine mentioned and highlighted, Democrats have been emphasizing this for a couple of cycles now. Republicans have really tried to catch up on this. The Republican National Committee for a couple of years now has been having this bank your vote campaign, really trying to emphasize that it's okay to vote early. The problem is, their person at the top of the ticket, former President Trump, has gone back and forth on this. Obviously, we remember his comments from the 2020 election, but so he is stepping on the messenger often when it comes to Republican efforts to get out that early vote.
phone numbers are, as usual, Democrats, it's 202-748-8000, Republicans, 202-748-8001, Independents, 202-748-8002. Our guest, Jasmine Wright, Paul Steinhauser. Paul Steinhauser's out in Pittsburgh after traveling with the Harris-Walz campaign. Jasmine Wright, you were recently in another purple state in Arizona. What were you seeing in Arizona?
Is Arizona a purple state? I mean, not to the people on the ground. I think that they feel that it's still traditionally Republican, but I was there for a couple days, spent some real time around people throughout the political spectrum, from canvassers to organizers to campaign aides, from Republicans to Democrats and independents. And I think that the vibe that I got there, John, was that people are feeling hopeful because of all the enthusiasm and energy that the vice president has brought to the campaign since she replaced Biden at the top of the ticket. But they're not necessarily optimistic. And that's in part because they're facing a serious numbers problem that they just didn't have in 2020. Over 100,000 registered Democrats have left the state since 2020. And so now Democrats have deficits, not just with Republicans, which is traditional, but it's kind of expanded. They have a deficit with Republicans of over 200,000 registered voters, but they also now have a deficit with independents, a flip from 2020 when they had more independents in that state. And so basically, when we see the Harris campaign reaching out to the Mormon community, reaching out to Republicans, obviously she's amassed a large amount of high-profile Republican endorsers in that state. It's not just because of virtue, it's because of necessity. They need those Republicans who were kind of molded in the image of John McCain, who are Mormon, who are independents, and that are really exhausted or just don't like extremism, don't like election denialism, don't like Donald Trump, to really come on the vice president's side. But they're having trouble because it is such a tall order. This is a traditionally Republican state. These people, a lot of their identity is based in being a Republican. And so there's one thing to say we won't vote for Donald Trump, but I think a lot of people are finding it's another thing to say that we want to vote for the vice president. So basically, people across the state are spread out trying to confront this problem in a lot of ways. Canvassers reaching out to independents, both independents of color, Latino women, all across the spectrum, reaching out to Republicans, really trying to amass this coalition that maybe didn't even exist in 2020 for the vice president.
What's the explanation for that Democratic exodus from Arizona since 2020? Is it COVID related? Is there another reason?
It's fascinating. People don't know. And it's so many people are pouring into Arizona. One person told me about 200 people just pour into Maricopa County itself a day. And a lot of them are registering independent because there's not really a penalty of it. You can request a Republican primary ballot or a Democratic primary ballot. And so there are a lot more independents in the state since 2020, really diversifying their interests. And they're coming from states like California, which obviously those are Arizona and California are two very politically distinct kind of states. And so it's kind of just an all melting pot of folks. And so we see the Harris campaign not just focusing on Republicans or independents, they're also focusing on the Native community, the tribal community, Latino working class women. I spent some time with them, but they're also trying to get out the vote against Latino men, but that's a place where they're having a lot of trouble because, as we saw in that latest New York Times poll, Harris is down double digits in comparison to Trump with Latino men in that state alone. And so they're really trying to amass this different kind of coalition that maybe didn't even exist in 2020 just because of all the changes in the demographics there. Let
me pause there, bring in callers. This political roundtable this morning with Jasmine Wright of NOTUS, political reporter there, Paul Steinhauser, Fox News, of course, the Concord Monitor as well, joining us from Pittsburgh via Zoom. And this is Rhonda joining us from Freehold, New Jersey. Line for Democrats. Good morning, Rhonda.
Good morning. Is the topic politics or the disaster?
It could be what you want to talk about. It's a political roundtable, so we've been talking the politics of disaster as well here, Rhonda.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to say that I'm praying for all the people in Florida, North Carolina, and South Carolina that have been affected by these hurricanes. And I went through Sandy, and your homeowner's insurance will pay for you to live somewhere else for 2 years while your home's being rebuilt. That's how it is in New Jersey. I love New Jersey. We live in the best state in the country. As far as politics goes, I'm glad you got a Fox person on there. Could you tell them to please start telling the truth? to their supporters. I mean, it's really sad that they would politicize a natural disaster and tell people if you take FEMA assistance, they're going to take your property. That's a lie.
Rhonda in New Jersey, Paul Steinhauser, on the fact that FEMA had to publish essentially a fact check for misinformation out there. How unusual is that?
Extremely unusual, and we were talking about this at the beginning of this segment. We've seen both President Biden and Vice President Harris numerous times this week chiding former President Trump for making things more difficult for FEMA and for government responders trying to help those, really hurt by these hurricanes. So it is a major issue, not only for politics, but also for the rescuers and for FEMA as they try to help people get back on their feet after these back-to-back dangerous storms.
Let me go to Lee in Grand Gorge, New York, Republican. Good morning.
Hi. I was concerned about yesterday's Obama's rally for Kamala Harris. Both he and Hillary are campaigning for her. Last month, she called Trump a threat to democracy and the world, which I find ludicrous considering during Obama's presidency, Hillary, the Secretary of State on national TV, gave Medvedev the reset button, leading Americans to believe Russia was our new best friend. Through a back door, they gave them permission to mine uranium-1 in 3 U.S. states. On a hot mic, Obama was overheard telling Medvedev, who was seated next to him, to tell Putin he'd have more flexibility during his second term. When Russia invaded Ukraine and took over Crimea, Obama said there were mostly Russians there anyway and did nothing to help the Ukraine refugees. And using campaign funds to establish the steel fake Trump-Russian collaboration.
Lee, got your point. Jasmine Wright on Russia, Ukraine, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, I think that the Democrats will definitely see it a different way. But I think just largely historians and pundits view the U.S. relationships with Russia in 2014 as very different than the U.S. relationship with Russia right now because of their invasion of Ukraine, because of how far that they're going, and because of how far that Democrats, Vice President Harris, President Biden believe that they would continue to go with former President Trump in office. This has been really a rallying call of the vice presidents since she replaced Biden on the top of the ticket. Biden talked about it when he was at the top of the ticket, basically saying that Trump has said that he likes dictators, that he would become a dictator on day one. And that's something that the vice president has said is a real liability for him and really basically making him unable to be president, and validates that option for him because of the way that he would cozy up to Russia. And now Trump has denied these things. Trump has basically said that Democrats are in some ways responsible for the threats on his life, something that I think both parties feel that the volume should be turned down. But I just think that we're in a different place in 2014 when it comes to the U.S. Relationship with Russia and Ukraine.
Paul Steinhauser, how much do you think we're going to be talking foreign policy on the campaign trail in these last 25 days?
I mean, there could be an incident overseas. Listen, we've got a lot of hot spots right now. We saw what Iran just did in reaction to Israel with firing of those missiles. So as of now, if things stay calm, no, it won't be a top issue. But of course, what happens on the ground in the Middle East or in Ukraine could instantly change that. On Ukraine, I mean, when it comes to Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, there isn't that much difference on some key issues. On some there is. And on this one, it is very stark. I mean, this is night and day when it comes to their philosophies on what to do with Russia and Ukraine. So it's an issue that definitely is a divider between those two.
Let me talk about another issue, Jasmine Wright, that gets a lot of attention on the campaign trail, and what this latest report on inflation means. The headline from the Washington Post story: inflation eased slightly in September as election nears. The consumer price index fell to 2.4% in September from a year earlier. The annual rate hasn't been this low since February 2021.
Yeah, this is something that is a win for Democrats right now because so much about this election has been wrapped around the idea of inflation, specifically for Arizona. We were just talking about that state. Very few states in the country have seen higher inflation that has stayed in the state of Arizona. That, not immigration, but that has become what voters in that state are most concerned about, what is wrapping around voters' ideas about election and about voting. And so this is a win for Democrats. This is something that they've said that they've been trying to do, that the reason why Biden has done all of these different various things and his Federal Reserve, obviously two very separate entities, but have done all of these things with the economy after COVID is to get to this point where we have lower inflation. And obviously when people go to the ballots and their gas is lower, maybe their housing price hasn't gone down, but things look better at the grocery store. Obviously, the vice president has talked a lot about price gouging. That is a win for the vice president because so much about these conversations have been that the Democrats have really screwed up the economy since former President Trump, and that people aren't better in the last 4 years.
To that point, Paul Steinhauser, 2.4% inflation is still positive inflation, and the bulk of September's increase driven by a rise in prices for housing and food. They increased 0.2% and 0.4% respectively on those two issues and what's on voters' minds.
Exactly. Listen, overall, the economy is doing well. Do Americans feel that way? No. And poll after poll shows that. It's so visceral when it comes to inflation. You see that when you go to the grocery store. You see it when you go to the gas station. It instantly affects voters. And that's why Donald Trump has had a very large lead on the economy, and the economy remains the top issue on the minds of American voters. Now, that margin he's had is definitely not as large as it used to be, but it's still an advantage for him. It's one of the reasons why this is a margin of error race with less than 4 weeks to go until the election.
Arlington, Texas is next. Bob, independent. Good morning. Welcome to the roundtable.
Good morning. Yeah, I'd like to know about Kamala, what she did before she got into the vice president's role. I know that she and Willie Brown turned San Francisco into a sewer, and nobody can deny that. Also, I'd like to know her qualifications. She has nothing to do with finances, economics, or the military. These are important criteria, and the only connection I can find with her in Hollywood is the fact that she was probably known as Wonder Woman.
That's Bob in Arlington, Texas. What does the Harris campaign say about Kamala Harris's qualifications on the state, on the federal level as a senator when they get these sort of questions on the campaign trail? Yeah,
well, I feel like they should probably try to take his words and use Wonder Woman as a bumper sticker, right? A new name for her as they hit the final stretch. I mean, look, I think that when I talk to a lot of her allies, they continuously say that she is one of the most qualified people they believe that has run for president because of just her long history in politics. Before she was vice president in 2021, she was a junior senator of California. There she was on the Senate Intel community. He asked about her military experience. That is a really prestigious committee that senators join where they get classified information about all of the issues that are happening in the world. That's where she really brandished her ability to know about foreign policy. And it's just something that not all of the 100 senators have access to because you have to be on that committee. Before she was on the Senate Intel committee and in the Senate, she was Attorney General for several years of California. California is a massive state. They have a massive budget. And whether or not people feel like she did a good job in that role, she was still one of the top executives of that role. That's why she says, you know, I've been an executive in all of these different places because she really was in charge of running one of the largest criminal justice systems in the country. Before she was Attorney General for multiple years, she was district attorney where she dealt with smaller issues in the state of California and San Francisco area. So she really has had all of these kind of positions. Now, has she moved up the ladder quickly? Sure. But she's had all of these positions in which we think of politicians having in their route to the White House. And in these roles, she says it on the trail that she prosecuted transnational crime. That was really her first touches when it came to the issue of immigration. She sued all of these different banks when it came to the housing crisis. So she does have these various experiences that they believe make her more than qualified for this position, and a lot more positions, I think, than a lot of men that you've seen run for office before.
Paul Steinhauser, you've got Greg out of Inverness, Florida, line for Democrats. Greg, welcome to the roundtable.
Hey, how you doing? Hey, I'm calling today. You got a Fox host up there. I don't know if he still works for him or not, but I wish they would stop all the lies that they tell. I would, in fact, would like you to tell Dan, I think his name's Dan Hauser, to tell everybody that Fox News.
We'll let you talk about your career in political reporting and give you a chance to respond, Paul.
Well, yeah, I was actually with CNN for many, many years before joining Fox. But, listen, we're in a very divisive time, and viewers have very strong opinions of the media and how the media covers this presidential election. That's very understandable.
What do you think about the media coverage or the media that hosts a debate and concerns we've seen about that? And do you think we'll see another debate this cycle? The Harris campaign still calling for another debate here in the final 25 days.
Both CNN and my network, Fox News, have been trying to get another debate. But the former president has said multiple times, including it was just yesterday or the day before, that will not be happening. And his argument has been that early voting now is underway in almost half the country in one form or another, either in-person early voting, absentee balloting, voting by mail. And so he says it's too late to do another debate. So it does not seem like we'll see another face-to-face encounter between Trump and Harris. It looks like the vice presidential debate from 2 weeks ago will be the last one.
And he made sure to add in the True Social post that I think you're referring to. I won the last two debates, one with Crooked Joe, the other with Lion Kamala. I accepted the Fox News invitation to debate Kamala on September 4th, but she turned it down. J.D. Vance easily won his debate, and the post goes on from there. Gordon in Kansas City, Kansas, Republican. Good morning.
Hey, John. When I called, I thought you were going to be fair and balanced here. I thought Jasmine was going to be something like Michaela Montgomery or Candace Owens. So it's 3 against 1 right now against me. I would like either one of them to tell me what Five Eyes is, and if they can't, I can tell them, because that is about Barack Hussein Obama spying on my president before he was president.
That's Gordon in Kansas City, Kansas. I guess the same question that we gave Paul about the focus on the news organizations themselves and trust in the people who are delivering the news. Is it just because we are so close to the end of a campaign cycle and that we've gotten so much focus on that, or is it your experience this entire cycle?
Yeah, John, well, let me just say that I am not Candace Owens. I'm Jasmine Wright, but I'm glad you're listening. Look, I think that there are a lot of valid reasons and why people have a certain distrust for the media. I think that that's just been a trend that's been intensifying over the last decade, this erosion of trust. But I think that journalists work really hard, and we really do try to bring you the most fair and balanced news that focuses on context and facts. And just because your facts, or the facts, not your facts, the facts do not align with your beliefs doesn't inherently make them wrong. That just means that you don't agree with them. And so I think that there's been just a focus on kind of tearing down the media or making it feel like they're only on one side. That's really a difficult place for journalists to be in. But also, journalism has its own responsibilities. And I think that people are more focused on reporters, individual reporters, particularly as we get closer to the election. I know my mentions are usually just a garbage fire. But journalists are really working hard to give you guys the context and give you guys the understanding that is required to make a vote at the ballot. And I think that that is what our job is, no matter kind of what the hate or the focus on who we are as people come and go. Because at the end of November, we want you guys to be the most informed that you've been this whole year, because that is what it's going to take to make the choice that you want to make for the election.
I think our viewers are pretty familiar with Paul's organization. organizations, Fox News and the Concord Monitor. What is NOTUS for folks who don't know?
Yeah, so NOTUS is a new outlet. NOTUS.org is our website, and we focus on examining power in Washington, who has it, who wants it, and how they wield it. And we are a great place because not only do we have this reporting outlet NOTUS, but we also have this teaching institute where we bring in young fellows, folks who are just graduating college, who went to grad school, even older folks who, we have one guy, John, who was in the military for a decade, now wants to become a journalist, or other reporters in local areas who want to get into national journalism. And we teach them journalism by doing, really trying to get to that last point, which is create this new generation of reporters who are so focused on facts and nonpartisan reporting, because we're a nonprofit newsroom. But we really combine it all together and just have this really scrappy little group of reporters who are kind of doing the best work in D.C. right now, telling folks what they need to know before November.
Paul Steinhauser, let me just stay on the media for one more second. What do you make of Kamala Harris's media blitz this week and the non-traditional media outlets that she has gone to try to reach voters?
Targeted, and I think in some ways it's targeted towards female voters. We were talking about that gender gap earlier this week. Earlier this segment. Part of her strategy for victory is to pump up the female vote, women voters, and I think these interviews, some of them, are designed to do just that. There's been plenty of criticism of Kamala Harris since she took over and replaced President Biden on the top of the Democrats' ticket back in mid-July, that she had been avoiding the media. She is stepping it up now, but the criticism continues that these outlets are friendly and that she hasn't done many hard-hitting interviews. She did that 60 Minutes interview, but then the Trump campaign instantly attacked CBS more than her on that one, saying that they edited out choice segments and they wanted to see the entire transcript.
I think what's interesting about her media strategy is that the election's going to come down to a couple questions. But the first is, who is Kamala Harris? What does she want to do? And how is she going to make your life better than Donald Trump? And I think that media strategy is definitely answering the first two, because maybe they're not as hard hitting. Maybe she's not going in to depth about her views on what she would do in Ukraine or Israel or other issues, although she did in 60 Minutes, but maybe not so on Call Her Daddy or other types of podcasts geared to young people. But she is talking about herself, and she is giving substantial answers to who she is and where she's come from and how she views the world. And I think that that's something that most people did not have a real reference for before she did this media strategy. So in that way, I think it has been successful in kind of detailing who is Kamala Harris and how empathetic can she be and how can she connect with the voters. Now, I think that there are other people who want to hear more substance, and sure, that may come or that may not come because you only have 3 more weeks. But if the question that she had to answer, at least one of the questions that she had to answer, was who is Kamala Harris, I think that she's very much so tried to, in these friendlier podcasts, in these friendlier media appearances like the Colbert Show, Call Her Daddy, All In podcasts on NBA, tried to answer that question about who she is and what drives her.
And Jasmine, one thing I will say is, listen, everybody knows Donald Trump, right? Opinions are very strong on him. It's very clear how people feel. Either they love him or they don't love him. Kamala Harris was very much an open book when she took over at the top of the ticket just 3 months ago. And this has really been a battle between the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign to define Kamala Harris. It's been a major, major part of this presidential election down the stretch.
And Paul Steinhauser, what do you make of Donald Trump's strategy? We talked a little bit about Kamala Harris, especially upcoming events in Coachella, California, and Madison Square Garden in New York.
Is New York in play? Is California in play? We haven't had a Republican win New York since Ronald Reagan in his 1984 reelection landslide. So why is Donald Trump, with time so precious, at this point in a campaign, it is extremely precious. So why is Donald Trump going to these blue states? It's a great question. And he was also, this stop in Madison Square Garden on October 27th will be his second in New York in just a month. He was at Nassau Coliseum in Nassau, just outside of New York City, just a few weeks ago. I was at that rally as well. His campaign says, they're realistic. It's not like they're going to be, winning electoral votes in California or New York. This is more of a media strategy. New York, obviously, the media capital of the country. You go to hold a large rally in a place like Madison Square Garden, and it's going to help you in New York. Maybe it helps a little bit down ballot, but this is more about getting the message out across the country and in those key battleground states.
I also think what's interesting about his media strategy is the reliance on these podcasts and live streamers that are focused on younger men, maybe just with some education, maybe no education, what they call low propensity voters, really trying to get out the quote unquote bros out to the ballot box. Now, I think that there's a risk to that because these are folks who don't traditionally vote or don't always vote all the time. But he is very much so reaching out to them, playing within that gender gap, making sure that young men feel seen by him and seen enough that they are provided the permission to maybe do what their mothers aren't doing or do what their sisters are doing, which is elect Donald Trump or try to elect Donald Trump by going into the ballot box in a way that maybe they hadn't gone in past cycles.
Do you want to explain who Logan Paul is?
You talk to the Trump campaign, and
I'll let you do that.
mention that going after low propensity voters is a crucial part of their formula for victory.
Logan Paul.
Logan Paul is now a boxer. He's now a WWE fighter or something like that. But he used to be a YouTuber. He has a massive following. Donald Trump sat with him. Donald Trump sat with some other folks who I think in a lot of ways repel a woman voter. Women don't really necessarily watch all these Twitches and live streams, but it is such a hyper-focused niche group of male voters that really don't engage with the Democratic Party. So they're kind of up for grabs. And this is who the Trump campaign is courting and trying to motivate them enough to mail in their ballots, register to vote, and go to the ballot. But of course, that is a risky thing of trying to get people who don't necessarily vote all the time to the ballot. But that's how the former president is trying to drum up his numbers, potentially in states in which Democrats would kind of clean a Republican.
About 15 minutes left in our roundtable this morning. Mike in Philly, independent. Thanks for waiting.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I'm really glad that you guys started talking about Trump's upcoming media campaign because that was actually part of what I wanted to talk about. I don't think that the former president's upcoming dates in Coachella or at Madison Square Garden have anything to do with whether or not he intends to win this race. I think that he intends to use those platforms to speak directly to Republicans who feel disenfranchised because they live in states that traditionally lean blue, for lack of a better word. I think that the most historical parallel to what we're going to see at Madison Square Garden is probably the Bund rally that Henry Ford spoke at, and in the 30s or whatever. But I think that his intent right now is basically to speak to people and to get them riled up so that he can engage in the same behavior that we saw him engage in last time. The intent here is not about whether or not he wins. It's about trying to make it so that he has an excuse when he doesn't. And that's something we should all be worried about. Thanks.
Paul Steinhauser, any thoughts on that?
It's clear in blue states, and I was at that event in Nassau Coliseum, there are plenty of Trump supporters in these states, even though they're vastly outnumbered by Democratic voters. MAGA is alive and well in parts of California, in parts of New York, in parts of Pennsylvania, which is, of course, not a blue state, but a very deep purple state. As for the excuses for charging voter fraud if he loses, yeah, I mean, it's clear if Donald Trump, loses this election, he is probably not going to be accepting defeat. I think that's pretty clear.
To Ed in Lawrenceville, Georgia, Republican. Good morning.
Good morning. My comments about the presidential election. I'm not a gambler, but I want my words to go out to everybody, to pass this on to anybody who is a gambler. Anybody that plays the Powerball Lotto or the Mega Millions Lotto, Carmela, if she's president, is set to collect more in taxes than the person who actually wins the top prize. And that amount of money is very hard to win. You have to have about a half a billion votes half a billion tickets to win that thing.
So, Ed, get me to your question.
So, wait a minute. All right. What my question is, do you think it's fair, as hard as it is to win the lottery, that she should get more. The government should get more in taxes than the person that actually wins the lottery? That's what.
That's Ed's question on taxes. I don't know if you want to talk tax policy.
Well, I love playing the lottery and I love going gambling at casinos. So, Ed, I'm with you there. I mean, I think that they both have very different views on tax policy, notwithstanding a question of whether or not the state gets more money with the lottery system. The vice president has really tried to show American voters, particularly the middle class, which has been an emphasis of her remarks, that she wants to create tax incentives like for housing, like for starting a new small business. She wants to take it from $5,000 to $50,000, that she wants to tax people who make over $400,000. She even talked a little bit about the capital tax gains, really trying to separate herself from President Biden on that she basically wants to fashion her campaign as one that is in support of the middle class. And against Donald Trump, she has been trying to tell the American people in her arguments that this is somebody that is not, that doesn't care about you, that doesn't care about the middle class. Now, Donald Trump has actually been talking a lot about tax cuts, something that are going to expire that he put in place in 2017 is tax cuts. Not only does he want to put those back in place, but he wants to create more tax cuts for Americans. He just brought up one a couple days ago. And so they have vastly different views about how they want tax policy to shape their economic message to Americans, particularly on this issue that we again talked about so clearly, that is so important to Americans, that their number one issue, the economy.
Let me show viewers Donald Trump yesterday talking tax policy.
I am also announcing that as part of our tax cuts, we will make interest on car loans fully deductible. So a man who's, a lot of you people are in the car industry, actually, I met a lot of them backstage. What do you do? I'm in the car industry. But a lot of them, and I told him about it, he's a very knowledgeable person. He said, here's a guy, he's done it all his life. He's sitting right over there, I don't want to embarrass him. But he said, where did you come up with that idea? That's the coolest thing. It's like the paperclip again, right? It's like the paperclip. Somebody comes up with the paperclip and everybody says, why the hell didn't I think of that, right? Somebody came up with a paperclip, I guess made a lot of money, and other people said, gee. But he said, you know, I've been in the car industry all my life. I've never thought about that. So we're going to make it fully deductible, the interest payments. That's going to revolutionize your industry. This will stimulate massive domestic auto production and make car ownership dramatically more affordable for millions and millions of working American families. This is a phenomenal thing, if I do say so myself.
Donald Trump yesterday in Detroit. Paul Steinhauser on that proposal and how you think it's going to play out here in the final 25 days.
Well, it's pretty clear, you know, what he was aiming for in Michigan, which is a state where the polls indicate it's a margin of error race. So the political message there, crystal clear. I was with Trump 2 days ago in Scranton, Pennsylvania at a rally. Big signs there. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime. Donald Trump has been putting out a lot of these proposals since the summer, and it is a very populist message. I think a lot of working class voters will like that message. The flip side of this is the Harris campaign pushes back, especially when it comes to the proposals from former President Trump on tariffs. Yeah. And they say that would be a tax on voters. It would be an instant sales tax that would increase your prices for any product that comes from overseas. I think what's clear with both of these candidates, though, is that neither of them are talking about fiscal responsibility and budget deficits. I think that is something of the past. And it's truly remarkable how, you know, the Republican Party has changed. The Republican Party, which used to be such a fiscal hawk party, now under Donald Trump is anything but.
Jasmine Wright.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that the Harris campaign continues to say about the former president is asking how he's going to pay for all of these different tax cuts, and whether or not the brunt of those tax cuts are going to fall on the middle class, really trying again to hit that message that Donald Trump doesn't care about the middle class. That is what the vice president's campaign says. Now the former president's campaign says that the vice president's policies don't make sense, that they wouldn't actually create real a change for Americans, and most importantly, that they wouldn't get passed by any Congress that is elected come November. And so I think that there are very dueling messages for the vice president, trying to focus on the middle class. For Donald Trump, Paul is right, a more populist message. But again, you're not really hearing in-depthly how folks want to pay for these. In her 60 Minutes interview, pushed on how the vice president would pay for that tax credit for new businesses, would pay for the tax credits for new homes, et cetera, et cetera. She said, you know, behind the scenes, I talked to Congress and they are in favor of these policies secretly, but there's not really evidence to it. So I think that there's a lack of fiscal responsibility on both sides, but certainly I think for the former president, he kind of says these tax policy ideas, but then never really shows his math behind the scenes. It's
still pretty early in Hawaii. Ted is in Ocean View, Hawaii.
I love Hawaii.
Ted, good morning.
Hello, how are you? Good evening.
Doing well, sir.
Actually, it's still evening here. Your morning. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning here. So anyway,
okay. What's your question at 3 a.m.?
Yeah, that's correct. I've been a farmer all my life. When I grew up in Washington State as a dairy farmer, and over here in Hawaii, I farmed for 35 years macadamia nuts. Okay. And you tend to get a feel for listening to people and making a character judgment. I think a lot of this, we can break it down to the bits and parts these guys are talking about, and they're both very good at what they do. But most people have a hard time grasping that, the majority of our populace. If they would just go with what sounds like it's the truth to them, would go a long way in this election.
So, Ted, what's your character judgment of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump?
Well, I think to me, it's dead simple. I mean, Kamala Harris, you know, in her careers, many, just reeks of, you know, quality character. And I can't say on the other side. And there's people in our family that go both ways, but I think it's going to come down to a lot of people have a hard time putting these bits and pieces together, you know, and the average American is really going to end up having to shoot from the hip and go, well, I think this feels right. And if you do that, we'll be making a step forward.
Paul Steinhauser, any thoughts on what it comes down to here?
I think quality and character is a key part of this election. First the Biden campaign, and now the Harris campaign is trying to paint Donald Trump as somebody who has none of those qualities. It's been crystal clear. That's part of their messaging strategy for months now. Whether that's effective or not, I mean, you just heard your viewer in Hawaii, where it is, I guess 3 a.m. right now, say that so many people are divided on this. It's another issue that it shows how Americans are incredibly divided when it comes to these two candidates.
To Max in Mechanicsville, Maryland, Democrat. Good morning. You're on the roundtable.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. You had a really succinct caller earlier that asked a lot of important questions, and it was breezed over and not addressed any of the questions. Full disclosure, I voted for Barack Obama, I voted for Al Gore, considered voting for Hillary Clinton, and I voted for Joe Biden. One of the issues the Democratic Party has, though, and the reason people are considering voting for somebody like Trump, who I'd never vote for, but is a very flawed individual, is because they're not addressing the fact that Barack Obama did say that Russia was calling, or the 80s were calling for their foreign policy back, and that Russia wasn't an issue. And the lady also brought up the fact that Hillary Clinton did give the reset button to the foreign minister from Russia, her counterpart from Russia. You also aren't addressing the fact that there were a lot of things done. You had the dossier that was created against Trump, and nobody addresses that. Hillary Clinton and Al Gore both contested the election. Forthright contested it. One went to court. It went to Supreme
Max,
Court all the way to
on Russia policy, do you think Kamala Harris gets tied to the Obama administration or the Biden-Harris administration here? And if it's her own administration, how do you think the Biden-Harris administration has done on Ukraine and Russia?
Nobody knows who Kamala Harris is tied to. She's just been inserted into the election because Joe Biden was ousted for some reason. We don't even know why. Nobody will even address why Joe Biden isn't running for president anymore. Nobody will be forthright and say, why is he not running for president? Or what happened?
Would you vote for him? Did you want him to run as a Democrat, Max?
I can't. It doesn't matter now. I voted for him the first time, but it doesn't matter now. There's somebody who didn't go through the primary process that was inserted into the election.
That's Max in Maryland. On that concern, which we heard a lot, perhaps more of at the time when Joe Biden stepped aside, how much are you hearing that these days besides Max?
Yeah, I think we're actually hearing it a lot less. But I think Max makes an important point, which is that people are confused about the democratic process and about all the things that happen. I think to answer your question, Max, the reason why President Biden is no longer on the Democratic ticket is because his fellow Democrats did not feel as though he could win a race against Donald Trump, launched in part because of that June 27th debate. Now, if you ask President Biden, I don't think that he would agree with that. I think that he feels that he would have a good chance against Donald Trump. But certainly his Democratic counterparts, including Nancy Pelosi, other folks in the House and Congress, no longer had the confidence that he could win. And also the poll numbers didn't say that he could win against Donald Trump. In fact, they were really much further apart than they are now with the vice president, which is why he stepped down. He said putting his country over party. And then you saw the vice president. And I think that there's always kind of a question of they inserted the vice president. Well, the fact is that the vice president's team, which surprised a lot of people, including me, who has covered the vice president for more than 6 years, was incredibly adept at consolidating all of the people, including J.B. Pritzker, including Governor Gretchen Whitman of Michigan, all of the people, Westmore here in Maryland, who Democrats thought would potentially launch a bid if the current president stepped off of the ticket. She consolidated those people in about 48 hours. She consolidated the delegates. And so it's not, I guess my answer would that be, it's really hard to run a primary if there are not people to primary the vice president. And so she did step up, and I think her team was pretty adept at it. Whether or not people feel that that's a transparent democratic process, I think is another thing versus exactly what happened. But there was a lot of doubt about President Biden's capability after that debate within his own party, and that is what led him to step down.
Paul Steinhauser, let me try to get one more call. Phyllis has been waiting a while in Durango, Colorado, Republican. You have Phyllis. Go ahead.
Good morning, C-SPAN and your two guests. I was watching Obama this morning for a whole hour. He trashed and made fun of Donald Trump. My issue is that the Democrats will not take any responsibility for dividing the country the way it is. And, okay, I'm losing it now.
That's okay, Phyllis. We'll take that point. Paul Steinhauser, you were in Pittsburgh, where Barack Obama was yesterday. What's your take?
He spent a good portion of his speech criticizing Donald Trump, chiding him and mocking him for trying to sell things to people, including the Trump Bible. That was part of, and you're going to hear that from former President Obama as well going forward on the campaign trail. That's part of his argument that Donald Trump is not worthy of being reelected back to the presidency. As for this whole idea of division, Democrats for a long time have called Donald Trump a divider in chief, that's his mantra. But both sides in a heated election are going to be saying things that are going to upset voters. That's crystal clear.
Paul Steinhauser joining us from Pittsburgh this morning with Fox News and the Concord Monitor. Jasmine Wright has been in studio with us with NOTUS, a national political reporter there.
A reminder, this program and all of C-SPAN's campaign 2024 coverage can be found online at cspan.org/campaign.